In Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis, we are determining the likely monetary or resource hour impact of a positive risk or negative risk. As you can see in this example on the screen, we've got the probability in absolute percentage times the impact in dollars, and that gives us something called the EMV, expected monetary value or risk magnitude. P times I, where P is probability and I is impact. As you see from the first risk, we've got a 0.8 times 40,000, and that gives us a 32,000 EMV, or risk magnitude. The main aim in Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis is to find the aggregate effect of all of the risks, not just one in isolation, but all of the risks. Here's a very simple illustration as to how that is achieved. I know this is a short list of negative risks, but you could also have positive risks included in your risk register. Add up all the risks and you get a value at the bottom. Now this could be done in a more professional fashion using a Monte Carlo, but that is pretty much the rough illustration of what happens here. Find the EMV for all the risks, positive or negative, and find the aggregate effect. Okay? The aggregate effect does not always translate into a straight addition. Remember, there could be risks that are made worse as a result of other risks occurring at the same time. There could be risks that happen jointly and have a totally different effect on the project. So this is only for illustration purposes. Our main goal, once again, is to analyze identified risks by finding the expected monetary value and reprioritizing the risks. Let's take a look at the inputs to this process. The first input here is the project management plan because it contains several plans, such as the risk management plan, first of all, that guides us on how to perform this process. Also, in the project management plan, we have the scope baseline, the schedule baseline, and the cost baseline. And these are all reliable starting points for quantifying the effect of a risk on scope, on schedule, and on cost. The next input is our usual suspect project documents. You've seen project documents all over. Project documents going in, project documents updates coming out. And I know I've ranted a little bit about this, but I would like to call your attention to the fact that this does need to be studied in more detail for your exam. But if you're taking a cursory overview and just trying to understand what exactly a process is made up of, don't go through the laundry list trying to cram each one. Okay? The ones specific to Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis are called out in the PMBOK guide. Do your best to read them. Do your best to understand their relevance, but don't lose sleep over it. You see, the PMI has a lot more difficult stuff and relevant stuff to test you on. So project documents here include the assumptions log, the basis of estimates, cost forecasts, duration estimates, milestone lists. Let's talk about those first of all. Why do you need something of an estimating nature, of a cost and schedule nature? The reason is because we want to find out what the effect of a risk is from a schedule standpoint. How many days is that going to add to the schedule? What is it going to do? Let's be quantitative about it. Well, of course you need to know the estimates. Of course you need to have the baselines for those things. Of course you need to know what a milestone list is for the project. This is going to help you in your quantitative risk analysis. We could also have the risk register, of course, the risk report, the resource requirements, and schedule forecast as inputs here. The real big one that stands out for me in project documents, first and foremost, is the risk register. Now, the PMI puts this list in alphabetical order, but it does not mean that what is down at the bottom is less important than what is at the top. It's just in alphabetical order. Two more suspects: enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. For the same old reason, industry studies from previous projects, similar projects, published materials, and under organizational process assets, any assets that can impact this process, any templates, tools, information, they are all relevant. Let's take a look at our tools and techniques. First tool and technique is expert judgment, expertise. People who have been there, done that. People who have translated information regarding these project risks into actual numbers. People who have done quantitative risk analysis on previous projects. People who have carried out modeling techniques and know about Monte Carlos, all that stuff. These are experts that we want to include on this process. People who can take a risk, look at it, and go from a qualitative risk analysis of a 12/25 to a quantitative risk analysis, giving you some very reliable data with numbers as far as the impact to schedule or the impact to cost. The next tool and technique is data gathering, and this specifically addresses interviews. We could use interviews to glean data of a quantitative nature. The next tool and technique is interpersonal and team skills. These interpersonal skills, of course, facilitation techniques is big. We want a skilled facilitator to be able to drive the work to be done in this process. We want someone who can build consensus among participants, someone who can ensure that we're focused on the task, and someone who can get stuff done. The next tool and technique is representations of uncertainty. How do you represent uncertainty found in a task or on the project? There are various options talked about in the PMP guide. These are known as probability distributions. For your exam, be aware of the shape and the interpretation of the shape and the form of these probability distributions. The PMI mentioned triangular, normal, log normal, beta, uniform, and discrete distributions. Be sure to know what these are before your exam. The final tool and technique here is data analysis. Within data analysis, we have various bullets. The first one is simulations. And the big one that we talk about here is the Monte Carlo analysis. This is where we use computer software to iterate the quantitative risk analysis model several thousands of times to give you realistic values for what the outcome could be if a certain risk occurs. The Monte Carlo simulation, of course, is not something that you expected to run, but do be aware of it. And the next bullet point here is sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis is an analysis where we determine which of the individual project risks have the highest impacts on a project. Those that have a high impact to cost or schedule are observed. One display of sensitivity analysis is the tornado diagram. Definitely know this before your exam. It looks like a tornado and it lists out the risks, but it also shows those that are most sensitive. The most sensitive risks in a tornado diagram are those with longer bars. We also have decision tree analysis mentioned under data analysis. Decision trees are used to examine the alternative path in a project that represent different decisions or events. I would highly advise that you read up figure 11-15, which shows an option of building or upgrading a plant. And going through this will give you a much better idea of what to expect on the exam. The final bullet here is influence diagrams. And these are graphical aids that help decision making under uncertainty. Let's talk about the output of this process. The major output, the only output, is project documents updates. And this is listed as the only output because within this, we could have our risk register. We could also have a risk report. So when we think about these two things that we could have as project documents updates, think about what could be in this risk report by now. We could have an assessment of overall project risk exposure that needs to be, of course, reported to stakeholders. We could have a detailed probabilistic analysis of the project. We could have a prioritized list of individual risks. We could have trends in quantitative risk analysis results, and we could have recommended risk responses. These are some of the things we could have in our risk report by now. Also remember that lots of the data in the risk register has now been updated. We now know what things are in order of magnitude, and we know which risks to attack right now and those that we can afford to delay a reaction to. For your exam, I expect questions on expected monetary value, be aware of probability distributions, and a lot of the different definitions that I've covered. And that concludes our review of Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis.